The whole courtroom went still when Prince Adrian stopped breathing for a second and stared at the floor like it had opened under him. Judge Miriam Vos had just lifted a printed page with both hands. Her glasses sat low on her nose. Her voice was steady, but the words she read were not. They were private messages. Not rumors. Not press chatter. Not palace whispers passed from one silver tray to another. Messages. Direct, ugly, cold. And every person in that room knew, in that exact moment, that the story of Adrian and his wife, Duchess Seraphine, was breaking apart in public. "He is useful, but fragile," the judge read. Nobody moved. Then came another line. "If he starts missing them again, I'll remind him why we left." A reporter in the second row dropped her pen. A court artist later said Adrian's face changed so fast she could not keep up with it. One second he looked tense. The next, he looked hollow. Not angry. Not shocked in the loud way people expect. Just emptied out, like someone had reached inside him and taken hold of something vital. Let's talk about what really happened, because this was not just another royal scandal. This was the kind of scene people remember for years. The kind of story that gets repeated over late lunches, on train rides, in make-up chairs, at kitchen tables, and in the quiet spaces after midnight when people are honest about how power really works. Today we are diving into the collapse of the most talked-about marriage in the kingdom of Alderaan. On paper, it had once looked perfect. Prince Adrian, the wounded younger son of the crown, loved by the public for his warmth and his sadness. Seraphine Vale, a dazzling former actress from the coastal republic of Marist, sharp, poised, modern, and almost too camera-ready for palace life. Together they had sold the world a big story: love against tradition, freedom against control, truth against silence. That was the version the world knew. But on this particular occasion, inside the High Court of Belhust, another version began to come out. One line at a time. Accounts from journalists and insiders revealed the hearing had started like any other grim legal day. Adrian was in court over a privacy case against the Daily Lantern, a paper he said had crossed every line. His team expected arguments over unlawful intrusion, leaked details, and tabloid games. They did not expect the defense to arrive with message archives pulled from legal discovery. They did not expect those messages to come from Seraphine's oldest friend. And they certainly did not expect the judge to decide the public had a right to hear them. At first the messages sounded ordinary. Complaints about headlines. Notes about travel. Frustration over public duties. A remark about school plans for the children. One line about wanting a quieter life. Nothing explosive. Then the tone changed. Seraphine began speaking in strategy. Not pain. Strategy. She wrote about timing family announcements for maximum sympathy lift. She described one senior royal as useful for contrast, and another as better kept distant unless needed. She joked about how palace silence could be turned into proof of cruelty if handled correctly. Then came the media talk. According to those who sat through the full reading, the most chilling parts were not even the insults. It was the planning. The calmness. The neat little way emotion had been turned into a tool. There were discussions of interviews, product launches, brand alignment, documentary pacing, and what Seraphine called the grief window, meaning the best moment to release painful personal material when public attention was most intense. That phrase spread through the courtroom like smoke. Adrian's lawyer asked for a pause. The judge refused. So the reading continued. Witnesses confirm Adrian gripped the rails so hard his knuckles went bone white. He did not look at the public gallery. He did not turn toward the press bench. He just stared straight ahead, as if hearing a stranger describe his life. But there's more to this story. Because the real blow was not simply that the Duchess had private thoughts. Everybody has private thoughts. Everybody vents. Everybody says things they would never want read aloud. The true horror of the moment was that the messages suggested planning so detailed, so patient. and so cold that the entire escape story Adrian and Seraphine had sold to the world now looked different. Maybe not false in every part, but shaped. That distinction mattered. People had believed they were watching two wounded people trying to survive a cruel machine. What many people don't know is how quickly that image began to change once the court started reading lines about staggered reveals, controlled tears, and keeping him emotionally pointed in the right direction. One line caused actual gasps. If he speaks from the heart, it gets messy. Better if I frame it first. The judge read that slowly. Very slowly. Across the room, a senior correspondent from the Belfast Ledger later said even the defense team seemed startled by how brutal the messages sounded out loud. On paper, words sit still. In a courtroom, they breathe. They hit flesh. They land on faces. They reveal tone in a way screenshots never do. And Adrian was hearing his wife's tone for the first time. By then, the gallery had gone into that special kind of silence only truly rich scandals create. Not normal silence. Hungry silence. Nobody coughed. Nobody shuffled papers. Even the sketch artist stopped moving for a moment. Then another line came. He still thinks this is about healing. That was the point when the room understood this was no longer about privacy law. This was about a marriage. This was about power. And this was about whether the prince in the witness box had been living inside a story written by someone else. Many are questioning how nobody saw it sooner. The answer is simple. When grief is public and love is photogenic, people ignore the cracks. They want the fairy tale or the tragedy. They do not want the spreadsheet hidden inside it. Yet there it was. A marriage, reduced to timing. A family wound, turned into a campaign. A prince, sitting in court, while strangers listened to his life being sorted into assets and risks. And still the judge kept reading. By the time she reached the later messages, Adrian had bent forward with his elbows on his knees, one hand over his mouth. A bailiff took half a step closer. His attorney whispered something to him. Adrian did not respond. He looked like a man hearing the weather report for the end of his own life. That morning began as a lawsuit. By noon, it had become a public unmaking. And what the world would learn next made the first hour look almost gentle. To understand how they got there, you have to go back before the court, before the documentaries, before the carefully lit interviews and the slow, expensive-looking walkaways from palace gates. You have to go back to Prince Adrian himself. He had always been the softer son. His older brother, Crown Prince Lucian, was raised for shape and duty. Straight lines. Clear roles. Fewer mistakes. Adrian was different. He smiled at guards. He hugged staff. He went off script. He had the sort of face people read feelings into, which is a beautiful gift until you are born royal. Then it becomes a weakness everybody thinks they understand. He had lost his mother young, and the kingdom never let him forget it. There are some children who grow up with grief in private. Adrian's grief became public furniture. People pointed to it when he was kind. They pointed to it when he was reckless. They pointed to it when he fell in love. Then Seraphine arrived. She was not born to court life. She came from television, charity panels, brand campaigns, and bright rooms full of people who knew exactly where the camera was. She spoke fast, listened well when she wanted to, and had a way of making whoever stood in front of her feel chosen. Royal insiders remember those first months with a sort of embarrassed fondness. Adrian looked transformed. Lighter. Fierce in love. Protective in a way that made older courtiers uneasy. He had always wanted something warm and unquestioning. Seraphine seemed to offer exactly that. At first, the palace tried to make room. She was given briefings, staff, schedules, private advice, soft landings. There were lessons about custom, order, hierarchy, and the 1,000 invisible rules that hold up royal life like stitching under silk. None of it looked natural to her. Some said she found it old-fashioned. Some said she found it insulting. Some said she simply found it boring. What many people don't know is that the earliest tension was not dramatic. It was small. Repeated. Annoying in the way truly serious trouble often begins. She wanted to know why some visits mattered more than others. She wanted to skip local events that had little press value. She questioned why every family member outranked her in some places and not others. She asked which appearances generated the strongest public return. That last phrase traveled around palace offices for weeks. Not because it was evil. Because it sounded like business. There were also stories, whispered at first, about staff turnover. A dresser left. Then an assistant. Then another aide asked to be moved. Officially it meant nothing. Unofficially, people noticed a pattern. Seraphine liked speed. She liked loyalty. She liked people who understood a look before she finished a sentence. Palace households do not run on that kind of instinct. They run on order, precedent, and long memory. The clash was coming long before anyone named it. Then came the first warning signs inside the marriage itself. Accounts from insiders reveal Seraphine was not content to simply advise Adrian. She shaped him. She refined his language. She told him which parts of family conflicts sounded strong, and which parts made him seem weak. At dinner parties she would correct his phrasing with a laugh, touching his wrist so it looked tender instead of controlling. Most people missed it. A few did not. One former household secretary later said Adrian began speaking in assembled paragraphs. That was the phrase. Assembled paragraphs. His old messy, emotional way of talking started disappearing. In its place came polished thoughts with clean edges and memorable lines. Better for television. Better for statements. Better for war. Then there was the matter of evidence. Seraphine, according to later testimony in court, had developed a habit of documenting every slight. A delayed answer from a senior aide. A seating change at a family dinner. A correction from a private secretary. A facial expression from the Queen's cousin during a chapel service. She logged these moments in voice notes and private texts. Some were real hurts. Some were misunderstandings. Some were probably nothing at all. But collected together, they became a story. And stories are powerful when you are patient. Many are questioning how no one around Adrian pushed back harder. Some did. His brother did quietly at first. His father tried the gentler route. Senior courtiers urged slower decisions. A family chaplain reportedly advised a long pause before any public break with the palace. Adrian heard all of it as hostility. That is what happens when love and resentment begin speaking with one shared voice. Then came the leaving. Officially, Adrian and Seraphine stepped away because life inside the institution had become unbearable. The pressure, they said, was crushing. The media was relentless. The support was not enough. And to be fair, parts of that were true. The press had been vicious. Palace response had often been stiff and slow. The system had failed them in real ways. But the messages read later in court painted another layer underneath. There had been planning. Long-range planning. Not escape and panic, but departure with timing, brand positioning, legal consultation, and media coordination already underway. There were notes about announcement windows. Talks with overseas firms. Budget forecasts. Audience mapping. Which country would offer more sympathy? Which network would pay more? Which family details could be used early, and which should be kept in reserve? That phrase, too, would come back to haunt everyone. Kept in reserve. Like trauma was a line item. Like sorrow had a release date. Then came the interviews. The first big sit-down drew huge numbers. Adrian looked raw. Seraphine looked composed. He spoke about pain, neglect, old wounds, old fears. She spoke about isolation, disrespect, being cornered. The world took sides in a matter of hours. And behind the scenes, if the messages were to be believed, the whole thing had been prepared with frightening care. A line about his mother was marked, strong if sincere. A story about family coldness was labeled, repeatable. One note advised against too much anger because hurt plays better. That was years before the court. Years before the prince sat in Belfast hearing his private life translated into strategy. Years before he learned that even his tears may have been scheduled by someone else. Then came the moment that turned discomfort into danger. A friend, one Seraphine trusted from long before the palace, began keeping everything. And when the lawsuit opened the doors, that friend became the hinge on which the whole beautiful story swung wide. On that particular occasion, the weather outside the High Court was bright and cold, the kind of winter light that makes stone buildings look harder than they already are. Inside, the air felt stale. People had packed in early because royal hearings always attract a crowd, but this one carried special heat. There had already been whispers about surprise evidence. Reporters from half a dozen countries lined the benches. Court officers kept scanning the room. Adrian arrived pale but upright. Seraphine did not appear in person. Her absence became its own kind of presence, hanging over every seat she did not occupy. Then the defense rose. Their lead barrister, Elias March, did not dramatize his voice. He did not need to. He simply said the defense wished to introduce message records relevant to motive, strategy, credibility, and claimed emotional harm. Adrian's legal team objected at once. There were hurried papers passed up. Heads bent together. One of his lawyers actually stood before the judge finished the sentence. Judge Voss listened. Then she asked 3 questions. How were the messages obtained? Were they authenticated? And did they directly relate to claims already made in court? The answers, to Adrian's visible alarm, satisfied her. That is when everything shifted. Witnesses confirmed the first 10 minutes were merely tense. The next 20 became unbearable. By the first hour, the hearing no longer felt legal. It felt surgical. The messages were arranged in themes: media strategy, family positioning, commercial planning, emotional scripting. That last category destroyed the room. The judge read a message where Seraphine suggested Adrian pause longer before answering questions about his mother because silence would help the camera stay on him. She read another where Seraphine described one interview outfit as soft enough to signal hurt. Then another. A note about reminding Adrian of a painful family memory before a public appearance, to keep him emotionally open. A woman in the gallery whispered, "My God!" Nobody told her to be quiet. Then came the lines about the royal family. Lucien, the older brother, was dismissed as rigid and predictable. Princess Helena, Adrian's sister-in-law, was described as dangerous because people trust her. King Rowan, Adrian's father, was reduced to a symbol first, a man second. The cruelty was not loud. That made it worse. It was neat cruelty. Organized cruelty. The kind that arrives after thought. Adrian's breathing changed. At first only people near him noticed. Then everyone did. He leaned back, then forward, then sat still with both hands clasped hard enough to shake. His lawyer asked for a recess on medical grounds. The judge said no. The reading had to continue. A physician attached to the court was quietly alerted. But the full truth was still to come. Because the worst messages were about Adrian himself. Accounts from journalists and insiders revealed the courtroom atmosphere changed when the judge reached a set of exchanges between Seraphine and her friend Leora Dane, spread across several months. The language there was not political. It was intimate. Tactical. Almost bored. One message described Adrian as lovely when guided, impossible when nostalgic. Another said, his guilt is still the easiest door. A third read, I can usually get him back on track by making it about loyalty. That was the point. Adrian bent over and covered his face. People would later argue over whether he cried then or later. It hardly mattered. The sound that escaped him was enough. Small. Broken. Quickly swallowed. But heard. His attorney rose again, and this time did not ask. He demanded a pause. Judge Voss finally called 30 minutes. The prince was escorted out through the side corridor by security while photographers surged beyond the court gates. Word spread before he even reached the private room. By the time he sat down away from the public eye, half the kingdom already knew the hearing had gone catastrophic. During the recess, every corridor came alive. Reporters called editors. Editors called lawyers. Palace officials called private secretaries. Investors called representatives. The whole machine began to spin. Inside a consultation room, Adrian reportedly sat in a chair and stared at the wall while his legal team argued over next steps. Should they seek to halt the reading? Should they offer settlement? Should they challenge authenticity again? Should they ask for the afternoon session to be sealed? But what could be sealed now? The words were already loose. Meanwhile, Seraphine's own office released nothing. No statement. No denial. No outrage. Just silence. And silence, in scandals like this, is a language of its own. When court resumed, Adrian looked years older. His eyes were swollen. His mouth seemed slack with exhaustion. Judge Voss asked if he wished to continue. He nodded once. He did not trust himself to speak. The final part of the reading dealt with future plans. That was the most damning material of all. Seraphine discussed a possible memoir of her own. She listed unresolved family tensions as remaining assets. She wrote about holding back enough for the second cycle. She even considered what to do if Adrian ever wanted reconciliation with his father. One line silenced the room a second time. Keep insurance in case he grows a conscience. You could feel the sentence hit the benches. By late afternoon, the hearing had stopped being about whether a newspaper invaded privacy. It was now about whether a duchess had built a life, a brand, and a marriage through careful emotional management of the man beside her. And Adrian knew the world knew it. The confrontation everyone had imagined for years had finally happened, but not in a palace drawing room, not in a private meeting with his father, not in a fight behind locked doors. It happened under court lights. In front of artists, clerks, lawyers, reporters, and strangers. It happened while a judge read his wife's private messages aloud until the prince in the witness box seemed to fold in on himself. By the time the court adjourned for the day, one truth had become impossible to ignore. The fairy tale had not shattered all at once. It had been drafted, edited, sold, and then exposed. By evening, the kingdom had split into camps, but the center of the story was no longer debate. It was the complete picture rising out of those messages like an ugly shape from dark water. According to journalists who covered the case, the archives suggested Seraphine had been building two parallel lives for years. In one, she was the wounded outsider trying to survive a cold institution with the man she loved. In the other, she was a planner, a strategist, a producer of outcomes, constantly sorting people into categories: useful, difficult, sympathetic, dangerous, marketable, disposable. Those stories can exist side by side for a while. Then something breaks. The most shocking element was not any one insult. Courts hear cruel words every day. Families say ugly things in private. Couples betray each other in language before they do it in action. No, the true weight of the case came from pattern. Message after message, month after month, the same habits appeared. Frame the pain. Time the release. Guide Adrian. Keep leverage. Never waste a family rupture. Never waste a silence. Accounts from witnesses reveal even seasoned royal correspondents looked shaken as the pattern emerged. One said it felt less like reading gossip and more like watching the wiring behind a stage wall spark into view. Suddenly every big moment from the past few years looked different. Every interview pause. Every tear. Every loaded sentence. Every solemn silence after a family event. Not fake, perhaps, but arranged. Many are questioning how much Adrian knew. That answer remains blurred. The messages suggested he knew some things and not others. He clearly took part in public attacks on his family. He clearly agreed to interviews and projects. He clearly told painful stories that damaged relationships already hanging by a thread. But the court also revealed something darker. Seraphine often spoke as if Adrian's own feelings were materials she handled more skillfully than he did. She referred to his homesickness as drift, his guilt as fuel, his tenderness toward his father as risk. If true, that language says everything. It says partnership had curdled into management. It says love had become administration. It says the prince was not only angry and wounded, he may also have been directed. Public reaction came fast and hard. By dusk, the hearing dominated every front page in Belfast. Street interviews played on giant screens above transit stations. Cafes buzzed with people arguing over who was victim and who was fool. Talk radio hosts sounded almost joyful, as if the kingdom had been waiting years for permission to say what they really thought. Some felt vindicated. Some felt sick. Privacy groups condemned the public reading of intimate messages and warned that betrayal by a friend should disturb everyone, no matter how they felt about Seraphine. A few cultural commentators argued that the court had turned emotional wreckage into spectacle. They were not wrong. But others pointed out that Seraphine and Adrian themselves had built careers by publicizing private pain. That fact made the moral line harder to draw and easier to cross. Inside the palace, the response was tight and careful. King Rowan issued a brief statement through aides expressing sadness and urging space for the family. Crown Prince Lucian said nothing at all, which many took as fury held on a short leash. Princess Helena attended a children's hospital opening the next morning in a pale coat, smiling for cameras with the controlled face of someone who had learned long ago that public composure is its own weapon. Society insiders report the palace was not celebrating. There was relief, yes. Vindication, perhaps. But also dread. Because when a royal marriage collapses in public, nobody walks away clean. The institution absorbs the damage whether it caused the wound or not. Then came the aftermath inside the marriage. By the second day, whispers spread that Adrian was no longer staying at the couple's country residence outside Belfast. He had reportedly moved into a private guest wing on an estate owned by an old family friend. Seraphine was said to be calling constantly. Some claimed she wanted to explain. Others said she wanted to control what came next. A servant quoted in one of the papers said simply, "He stopped answering." That rang true to people. It sounded like the first real choice Adrian had made in years. There was immediate talk of separation, then of custody, then of titles, then of money. Royal crises always become paperwork eventually. That is one of the colder facts of history. Even heartbreak gets scheduled. Even betrayal needs signatures. Still, beneath the legal and political mess sat something more human. A man had learned, in the worst place possible, that his private wounds may have been used as public tools. A family that had already torn itself apart now had to decide what mercy looked like. And a woman who had mastered image now faced the one thing image cannot defeat forever: accumulated proof. These stories provide insight into a very old truth: power does not always shout. Sometimes it flatters. Sometimes it comforts. Sometimes it holds your hand while quietly deciding how your pain can be used later. That was the real lesson of Belfast. Not that palaces are cruel. They often are. Not that love can turn into strategy. It can. Not even that the public enjoys watching beautiful lives crack. Sadly, it does. The deeper truth is that people will forgive almost any scandal before they forgive calculation wrapped in vulnerability. They can handle messy love. They can handle selfishness. They can even handle public family war. But when sorrow starts looking scheduled, something in the audience goes cold. Prince Adrian entered court that morning believing he was there to defend his privacy. He left having lost something far greater. The kingdom did not just watch a lawsuit collapse. It watched a man realize that the story carrying him for years may never have been his at all.